Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new episode of the In Production podcast. And today we have an amazing guest, Asif. Please tell us more about yourself and why should people listen?
Yep, certainly can. Nick, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk about AI, something that's near and dear to my heart over here. Myself, I've been in this space, data analytics, AI, over the course of my career, went through different industries, seen a lot of issues, opportunities, problems when it comes to AI, and very much being on the practitioner side that, okay, we have this tool capability, that we refer to as AI. How can an organization extract value from this? That's been my sort of role over the course of my career. And it's interesting, the last thing I'll say is that I'm old now, over
Hmm.
here. Why it's important to talk about AI, because there's a new generation of folk coming up who'll actually take the reins, and figure out, what works best from an AI standpoint. So it is interesting, for, I guess, folks such as ourselves to share, some of our experiences. So the folk, as society progresses and organizations evolve, how can we best use AI? But again, thank you for the opportunity over here, Nick, to talk about this topic.
It's a pleasure to coming. You have, I believe we're going to have a very interesting conversation. And the first question, I would love to learn more about the perspective that you have on data, because right now a lot of AI is used for using the data, working with the data on a different level to make better decisions and draw better decisioning. And you, in your experience, you came up through Coca-Cola, through Delta, and then when you landed in healthcare, I'm wondering what was the difference that you saw in how data was actually being handled to manage decision in the past in other industries, and what you saw in healthcare, maybe in a good way and in a bad way. I'm curious in both.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So for me, I guess the biggest compare and contrast in other industries that I worked outside of healthcare and then coming into healthcare were the number of factors that were influencing a decision that we can make through data and AI. Because at the end of the day, I'll be the first to say, yes, I'm an AI practitioner, but the end of the day, how you create value is by making more optimal decisions, better decisions, changing
Hmm.
the decisions that you're making without AI. That's what creates value in an organization. So one of the interesting things I found coming into healthcare, which is obviously is a very regulated industry, is the number of influences that you have when you try to make a decision. So in other industries, which may not be as regulated, there is a very, I guess, direct line between, sort of an AI or analytics output and the decision you want to make. But in the healthcare industry, there are things such as compliance, et cetera, all of those things that you need to take into account. And what then that does is it sort of at times diminishes the value that AI may bring to the table. So that's a big conundrum for us to think through, that in order for us to make the right decisions with AI, how do we sort of figure out, all the structural process, regulation, compliance, et cetera, all of those things to make better decisions going forward.
No, interesting. A lot of listeners have asked me in the previous podcasts, Nick, so it's very hard for us to do AI because we are too big. Like we have all these policies, all this governance. It slows down the innovation. You are a person that has been running data teams at United Health, which is a huge organization, and you also have experience at smaller regional plants. In your perspective, what is usually the difference in terms of scale, in terms of how fast change is implemented, and what did you observe gets harder as you go into a smaller organization? What kind of problems you start seeing then?
Yeah, definitely. I'll sort of summarize it in two words. In larger organizations, in my experience, the problem has always been around distribution, and I'll just explain what that means. And in smaller organizations or more regional healthcare entities, it's around prioritization. And I'll just share a bit more of what I mean by that. In larger organizations, because you have sort of these organizational forums, governance mechanisms, and structures in place, prioritization is usually sort of an easier pathway to get through over there. The key issue over there in larger organizations is how do you do this at scale? Because obviously in larger organizations, geographically dispersed, you have multiple stakeholders. So how do you take a capability such as AI and scale it across all your customers who need it? In smaller organizations, they're much more nimble, obviously, so that's a good thing. Decision making doesn't take as long over here. But the antithesis to that is that prioritization becomes an issue because you have a limited sort of pool of resources and funds through which to implement your AI mechanisms. You're always trying to sort of, with your sort of fixed pool of investments, say, trying to make these decisions, is now the right time for AI, or do I need to fix all this other tech that I've accumulated over the course of time? So prioritization becomes, in my opinion, or experience, I guess, more rather a much bigger issue at regional plans.
Interesting. Then a follow-up question here. Let's say for a recommendation for a new person that they just started in a new company, let's say in healthcare as a CDO, uh, before you pitch anything internally, before you build anything internally, you need to build kind of the lay of the land. What are you inheriting? How do you um, prioritizing this understanding of information that you have inherited of what is the infrastructure? How do you do it, and how do you prioritize? What would you recommend to prioritize based on your experience? Do things 1, 2, 3 because they're the most important, and they can expedite your further, I don't know, advancements in building.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. Here's the reality, keeping everything, all the hype and all of those things aside, Nick. Here's the reality that all of us have to deal with or contend with, is that if I'm a non-analytic stakeholder of
Mm,
any output that's coming through AI or data and analytics, my first question is, do I trust the numbers that are put in front of me? And we don't
mhm,
even need AI in the mix, because this has been an ongoing question. Even without AI, if I'm, an internal stakeholder, non-analytic stakeholder, and I get a dashboard or a spreadsheet or some number in an email, do I trust this number?
mhm,
And the reason why this sort of mistrust, if I may, occurs in organizations is because of multiple reasons, which are not new. We have been in the data space, know about this. There are fragmented data pipelines, data is incomplete, documentation may be available, may not be available, etc. KPI misalignment happens,
mhm,
across multiple business units. So the point over here is that now it's less about AI and it's more about the governance mechanism that you have into place to address this question around trust. And that's the keyword, I would get to, is that even before, for anyone, I guess, building a capability in an organization, even before talking about the technology and talking about governance mechanism, how can I address that question around trust? And then what are the
mhm,
2 or 3 things I need to fix, to address that question around trust? There are, a few. First and foremost, for me, in my experience, the most important thing to address around trust is KPI alignment.
mhm,
When I look at a metric, there's paid claim amount is a term which we all know in healthcare. I'll share this example. I won't mention the organization, but in one of the organizations I worked with, we had 5 different definitions of that one field. That we have now. That being said, it's just the way that organizations have evolved, because in order to get your work done within a certain business unit, you need to
yeah,
sort of have a different definition that you and your peers align to, which may or may not be connected to an enterprise definition of
mhm,
that. So those are some of the things. And in all this stuff that I talked about over the past 20 seconds or so, there's nothing about AI. We haven't even touched AI. So that would be my advice to someone new, that, treat this as, yes, we need to talk about the technology and the use cases and the models, but there's a whole governance layer, around building trust with your stakeholders that you also need to do in parallel, as
mhm.
you're expanding this program within organizations.
It resonates with me. In my day to day, in my professional work, we also work with healthcare providers, with insurance processors. And one thing that we see that, yeah, you have operations that have been, the processes that have been established
Yeah,
like years ago. And sometimes
yeah,
the team doesn't even know why they're doing things like that because there's been some kind of old regulation. And maybe the regulation is not even a part of the current regulation, but they still keep doing the process that way because they just never really reimagine and redefine it. So what you mentioned with the 5 ways for the same property, it's totally normal, and like we see that across the whole industry. Which takes me kind of like to the next question, because you're talking and writing very openly about the difference in AI activity and the AI impact that is actually being created. So if we portray AI as the Superman, what would be its kryptonite? What is going to be and you actually mentioned it. You said that it's going to be fragmented data, it's going to be weak governance, and you said that there's going to be unclear decision rights. Which one of these 3 is the worst one?
this was an easy question for me, Nick. Unclear decision rights, day in, day out, that's, for me, in my experience at least, that's been the key thing, that, or the key challenge, if I may, to
Hmm.
sort of value realizations from AI programs, because the other two when it comes to sort of governance and data, you can fix those. There are technology solutions, governance mechanisms, forums you have. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you can invest to fix those. Unclear decision rights is when you get into the human element of it. Now, you're not talking about tools and technology. You're talking about humans, and human behavior, etc. And to your earlier point, you're trying to create a new paradigm. And I know we're not trying to do this, but essentially, what happens is the perception is that if I'm, sort of a frontline individual, and I've been making sort of these decisions, over the course of the past, and now that decision becomes outdated because of change in policies and regulations. Are you saying that I'm making the incorrect decisions? And that's not what we're trying to say, but that's the perception that comes about. So really spending, in my opinion, spending a fair amount of time on aligning decision rights, accountabilities. If you have sort of an AI model that you want to put into place, who's actually going to be responsible for understanding that model, understanding the impact on my workflow as a non-analytics individual, and then what I need to change so that we can, as an organization, derive value from it. And that's a big, at least in my conversations with folk, it's a big black box for organizations. And there's a big service, I guess, that CDOs, chief AI officers can do to sort of clear up that black box that we have and focus on, sort of decision-making rights and decision-making authority, and how can that become more clear for an organization in parallel as we roll out AI programs.
100%. You can. I've been speaking with another CIO, and he told me that they ran a pilot, and it was perfect from the data standpoint, like technology standpoint. Like, it was good. It was great. It was a good job done by the technical team. But the moment where it failed was implementation for the frontline people. They just didn't trust this thing. They didn't trust the transformation. They never adopted it. They sabotaged it. And that was it. That was the reason why the pilot never succeeded, which is kind of like the foundation for my next question. What does a failed AI pilot actually look like from inside a payer organization? So how do you understand that it failed?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah, no, good question, Nick. And I'll be the first to say I've been part of failed pilots every now and then over the course of my career. And for me, the first and foremost thing that makes me sit up and start to worry is when everything shows up green on a status report.
really?
So there's something broken over here.
It's like, when children are being quiet, right?
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. So there's something going on over here. And usually what happens is that, the reason everything is green is, again, we're focusing on the capability. We're focusing on that delivery date. We're not focusing on the end-to-end value. And the reason this is an important topic to talk about, because that end-to-end value is what the CFO is looking for. So there's a disconnect now happening. So if I come in and say, I look at it purely from a project management perspective, you've got a team that's working together, that's implementing this AI model, and whatever, on the 30th of April, we're going to have this model go live, and everything is looking good. On the 30th of April, we launch the model, everything is green. And the CFO is sitting back and saying that's great, but what's time to value over here? When are we actually going to realize value, say, in terms of care gap closure? When can I get that measurement in place? And usually, that's where the disconnect happens, So what that means is that, and this is what I've seen over the course of my career, is that everybody's aligned, everybody's happy, everybody's motivated, engaged for the first 3 months, because things are, usually in green status, and you have get to green plans, and you go live. But then momentum sort of dies down, and now all the other issues that we talked about, that you launched, this program, this pilot, etc. You didn't tackle decision-making rights. At the other end of the spectrum, you got, for example, the call center agent or the clinician whose lives are already very difficult to start off with. And we have this big sort of AI program coming into place, and I'm
On
not
top of it.
exactly sure, what I need to do. I'm dealing with my consumers, patients on the phone, over here. And then you've got the CFO saying that, okay, that's great. We got the pilot green, will I get to see value, in 3 months? And now you've got this whole sort of chain of disconnects, in an organization. And it goes back to, pilot was green, everything was green. But after that, what happened, no one knows. And then 6, 9 months down the line, we're scratching our heads and wondering, hey, we didn't sort of realize the value that we were supposed to on this. So that's a big thing again, for, I guess, AI practitioners to think about how do you sort of think about that end-to-end value chain, in an organization.
Yeah, I think, and it's especially the price for mistake, and you can actually see this very well in the highly regulated industries like yours are. We see this for some of our clients as well. When you think about processes like utilization management, prior authorization, care escalation, all of those high stake decisions that are happening, when you actually curious in your insight, when you
Mhm.
actually try to put analytics, analyze, map the process, try to automate parts of those processes. What did you find out about the ideal state? This is how the
Yeah.
process should be, and how it was in reality. What was your learning when you saw the process paper and then you saw the real process?
Yeah, the key learning is how there is sort of a divergence between the process on a Visio or a policy document versus
Hmm.
how people are actually implementing that in real life, and what decisions folk are making to address the needs of their end consumers and customers. Now what happens is, in my experience, is that 60%, whatever, 60, 70% of the time there is alignment with the policy over here because things are generally
There
standard.
should be.
Yeah, that's right. But there are then these edge cases that happen that are not covered in words in a policy. And that's where, as a front end clinician, front end call center agent, a benefit specialist, whatever role you have, you're making these discretionary judgment based decisions.
Hmm.
And we rely on those folk to make those decisions with their experience and their so that's one of the things that AI brings to the surface, is this notion of a standard process. It exists on paper, but the reality is sometimes different. About now, we can always argue and debate whether there is suboptimality, are those decisions being the optimal decisions, but we rely on our front end folk, to use their judgment and make those decisions. There's actually one example, I'll quickly share for us, Nick, over here, that this, I guess, should hit home for us. This is about 10, 12 years ago. We were developing these health recommendation engines. What that was essentially is that at point of interaction with a consumer or a patient, you surface up these health recommendations specific to their health status that you have. And you were sort of sending over these recommendations, to the call center agent or the clinician on the phone. It would show up on their screen, and the clinician would make the recommendation to the end patient. As part of this, one of the things that I knew that, it's the last thing you want to do in these types of use cases is to have sort of an AI ML engine throw the model over the wall and then walk away from this. So I sort of went down to our call center and sat down, did some agent shadowing, and that gives you a real appreciation of, the stress, and the pressure that folk have to go through with all the questions that they need to address, with the patient. So if
Hmm.
I'm calling, I'm a mom, and my kid, sort of scrape their knee, the last thing I want is an AI recommendation. I want help, because my son is crying
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
the phone. So how do we address this disconnect between the algorithmic approach, of an AI-based recommendation versus the real life of a nurse or an agent who's trying to sort of address a consumer's question on the phone? And to cut to the chase, the way that we address this is that we give a lot of discretion, to folk at the front end. And we used the AI ML approach as more sort of a complement to what they did to start off with, essentially. Because I'll go back to sort of a quick example, a quick anecdote for us over here. This is a few years ago. I was at a sports analytics conference, and the head of sports analytics for this organization made an interesting comment where they said that in scouting, analytics is really important, because the individual said, when I'm a scout, I can go to one game at a time.
Hmm.
What AI does is it looks at all these data points and provides me with a recommendation of sort of the performance of a player, and that's one of the biggest value adds. And
Hmm.
that's what we were doing over here at the end of the day, is that you get all these data points together, curate a recommendation, and serve that recommendation up to the clinician to help improve that experience for the end patient that they're seeing, not to take over the decision that they had. So that was one of the ways
Hmm.
that we worked through this to help complement the decisions that they were making. But end of the day, give the agent or the clinician the discretion, to use their own judgment. And if at point of conversation they learn new things about the patient, they can certainly override the AI recommendation that we were providing to them.
Interesting. This is a very cool way to work, like to kind of build this transformation for the front office. I'm curious, how do you approach it for the back office? Let's say you have a team or even one experienced underwriter. The person has been doing this for the last 10, 15 years. They have tremendous amount of experience, and there are a lot of in a lot of places they're deviating from the process simply because they know how to do it better, how to do it faster. Or sometimes even you have two experienced underwriters, and in the same case, in the same kind of data, one will make one decision, another will make a different decision. How do you automate their work? Because I'm sure that you have some kind of RPA that is helping them to work, but how do you use AI, or how are you thinking about using AI for automating this knowledge that how do you even put 15 years of context into AI?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good question, Nick. So a couple of things I'll share over here. Number one is there is a merit to AI. There's certainly a merit to AI over here, and I think there's not any disagreement over there. Especially when you look at the old world, some of the old world of how we were doing data and analytics, batch mode processing, etc. Now you have things such as LLMs and sort of RAGs and
Hmm.
sort of vector approaches that you can get together to add more context to the data that you have and do it at a much faster scale that you were doing it in the past. So that's one of the merits that we have with AI. One of the things that AI does and is doing and will keep on doing is to surface, to use a movie term, the good, the bad, and the ugly in our overall decision making process. We'll highlight some good things, we'll highlight some not so good things, and there will be some ugly. And it also, that's the way organizations work over here.
Hmm. Hmm.
What it gets down to is two things. Number one, in my opinion, we are going to see a lot of edge cases come to light. And to your point, what at least I mean by edge cases is that 80% of the time, there are standard decisions, standard processes. It's a rule-based filter. If these three things happens, here's the decision we need to make.
Hmm.
Where the biggest risk in an organization lies is those 20% of edge cases where we're applying human discretion.
Yeah, that exception queue.
Yes, and are we making the right decision? So that's one of the biggest value adds that AI can provide, again, acting as sort of complementing the decision that our frontline staff are making, and sort of taking, if there are suboptimal decisions being made because of a number of things, information is outdated, all of those sorts of things. AI can help make those decisions. There's a bigger piece, there's a bigger problem, in my opinion, to this is that initially, if we don't handle it right, there will be a breakdown of trust.
Hmm.
Because what we're not trying to do is to bring this perception that AI is providing a better answer than you, who are dealing with the end
Yeah,
patient.
yeah, because then they will sabotage it or they will
So
wouldn't trust.
absolutely. So these two things, around, sort of the edge cases coming to light and helping with more optimal decisions and ensuring that, we do this in a way that trust is sort of maintained. Those are the two biggest things probably we need to think about.
That's cold. What would you recommend to, let's say, a mid-market health plan that is stuck in pilot mode? There's an organization, they're running 5 different pilots at the same time, and they see medium to no to mediocre results in any of them, like nothing substantial. What is one structural thing that you would recommend them to do that they're getting wrong right now?
Yeah, it's sort of related to some of the things that we were talking about earlier is that you got to think about AI as an operating model as opposed to AI. Maybe we
Hmm.
stop using the term AI, over here because people get hung up on the term. But it's basically a new operating model that you're trying to roll out in an organization. And here's what I mean by that. And here's why organizations get stuck in this is because, again, you are very much embroiled in the technology, the tool, the rollout of it, hitting those dates, that you need to roll out the program. And no one will disagree with that.
Yeah.
But what you're not sort of addressing right away is, or in parallel, which you should, is again, decision-making rights. If I'm at the other end of this and I'm the recipient of an AI output, what am I supposed to do with this? Do I need to change the way I'm making decisions?
Hmm.
Will the AI override the decisions that I'm making? Is it more a support, for me to sort of understand how I make decisions? Can I even trust this data point that AI is providing to me? So that's the sort of the black box, that's over here, and that's in my experience why organizations get stuck, because again, there's a lot of momentum around the project plan, around the tool and the technology hitting that go live date, etc. But then phase two of it, when actual change management needs to happen and decisions need to be made differently to get to that value equation that we all want to, that's the piece that either organizations miss, talking about at the start of a sort of an AI plan, and now you're running around, sort of trying to figure out how do we address that phase two of it, or you're, I guess, at times throwing stuff over the wall and assuming that your internal stakeholders will totally exactly
Mm-hmm.
understand what to do with this. Issue in that, obviously, is that you now get into this cycle where, again, it goes back to an earlier example, is that now you're stepping back and saying, have I created value for the organization? And then 6 months down the line, you're saying, yeah, the value that we initially sort of thought about and that's not been created, what are the reasons? And you get into now this iterative process of trying to figure out why, etc. And now you get into organizational change management of, what we need to do differently. So there's a lot of, and along this journey, what happens is you start to lose trust and faith, of your
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders in this. So that's a big issue, I guess, that we have, that I see in organizations with AI. So the point I'm making is that thinking about the technology roadmap of
Mm-hmm.
a pilot and the organizational change management piece that needs to go along with that, that should be part of the whole program from.
Interesting. I would love to get one more advice from you for the close.
Yeah.
Imagine right now in the audience that's listening or viewing, we're going to put an episode right now in April of 2026, but it's going to be here forever. So maybe if somebody's listening to this in right now or in a few years, and imagine somebody's walking into a CDO or analytics leadership role at a regional player, or maybe just in any company
Yeah.
doing AI. What's going to be the thing that you would recommend them to do? Kind of piece of an advice that you wished somebody gave to you when you were starting out, what would
Yeah.
you advise to them right now?
Yeah. The one thing I would say, Nick, is, and I'm obviously speaking as an AI practitioner, stop
Mm-hmm.
talking about it as AI. Think of a different name for it, because truly that's what it is. At the end of the day, it's not about, it is about an AI model, but it's not really, it's about an operating model change that you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to implement using AI as a tool. So the AI is not the end, it's a means to the end over here. And
It's a
what is the
vehicle.
end, in my opinion?
Yeah.
It's the operating model change. And now you get onto all of these things that we talked about. There's a big AI component. AI is at the center of it, but there's a whole operating model wrapper around decision making rights and accountability, around trust in data, etc., around KPI alignment, around
Mm-hmm.
measurement. So if I were to sort of give I guess, advice to any CDO coming in who's got a mandate around it's, less focus on the word AI, and it's more focus around, how we're going to change the operating model of the organization.
This is gold. I think it's going to be the name of the episode. Very good quote.
All right.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing the insights, sharing your experience. What's going to be the best way for listeners or viewers to reach you if they would like?
I can, just reach out on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best place for me. Reach out to me on LinkedIn if anybody would like to connect, talk, shoot the breeze. If you're in Minneapolis, anybody in Minneapolis, we can go out for coffee or stuff. But always happy to talk to folk, because I learn, as much from folk as I guess, hopefully they can learn from me.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for your time, for the insights, and I'm waiting for the next couple of months to do the second part.
All right, that sounds great, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss and talk. Really enjoyed our time together. And then for our audience, again, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Lovely.